Elspeth Shaw is a partner, people leader, and advocate for authentic, people-first recruitment. Starting her journey as a candidate herself, Elspeth quickly discovered a natural calling for building connections and understanding what people need to thrive at work. Today, she's a partner at C&C Search, a leading recruitment firm with a mission to prioritize mental well-being, diversity, and empathy in the workplace. In this episode, we reflect on humanizing recruitment, balancing fear with confidence, and how one specific book changed Elspeth's perspective on life completely. But make no mistake, Elspeth is no stranger to career transitions herself, and like many others, has doubted her calling not once or twice. Her best piece of advice? Be afraid, but don't be. How does one do that? Tune in to find out.
And I think that comes with it, the imposter syndrome. So you think, oh, what happens if I'm going to fail? It's way above me. I don't think I can do that. And so it's okay to actually be afraid, but don't be afraid to take those chances. And I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. So let those self-doubts come in, but actually learn yourself how to overcome those self-doubts so you can learn from your experiences and then just keep developing yourself on a more personal basis.
Elspeth, hello. I'm so pleased to have you on the show. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
Excellent. Well, as our listeners will know, I do like to talk about two things on this podcast. One is well-being, and then the other one is personal development and especially changes in your career. And you worked out for C&C, which is a search firm.
Yeah.
But what you do, I think, very interestingly, is that with the brand that you and I has created in the founder Lucy as well, you're combining not just looking for jobs to people, but actually providing training and mentorship and coaching. And I thought that's quite unique. Not many people seem to be doing that right now.
I think for us, it's all about giving back to the community. And I think especially sort of when we reflect back over what the last nearly 5 years, which is crazy, at the start of the pandemic, that's when I think a lot of topics came to light during that period. Mental health was being spoken about a lot more. That wasn't necessarily, ever a topic before. We obviously suddenly all went fully remote, then into more of a hybrid environment, the flexible working. We then touched upon, those with childcare and schools, having to teach, kids at home. So I think, sort of reflecting back on those sort of 4.5, nearly 5 years, it really allowed us to sort of reevaluate us as an organisation as well and sort of reflect inwards and actually see, okay, well, what can we do to support that community during this unusual period of time when no one's come across this before, and what can we do in order to enhance that and sort of give back to those people?
Yeah. So how did you end up working in this role at all? I know that you had a somewhat different start. You didn't start necessarily straight in recruitment, but you are now. So it's always interesting to draw on your, and I wonder if you are drawing actually on your own experience, having gone through the career changes yourself when you work with your candidates.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of those things that I hope that I'm able to support people with those changes. I naturally fell into recruitment. It was never a career, at school or sort of after leaving school that I necessarily wanted to do. I didn't even know what recruitment was. I actually thought I wanted to be a midwife. So very different career perspective. And that's sort of what I always had my mind set on at school, that I wanted to be a midwife. So actually making that big transition, and, my parents have never really worked in the corporate world. So I didn't really have anybody to talk to. Or sort of have that support at home, although they are very supportive parents, which I'm very fortunate for. I didn't have anyone to sort of have that professional corporate sort of conversation with. And so actually what's interesting is actually with the people who I speak with on a day-to-day basis and relationships that I've been able to sort of build up over sort of the last 10 years or so, it's really interesting to see their own career projections and actually supporting them because of the changes that I've made and sort of built upon my own life experiences. It's then being able to support those with a similar transition that obviously everyone goes through their own story, but and able to sort of feed and support that sort of story as much as possible.
I think when people think about recruitment firms, there's probably two different reactions that you get, one positive and one negative.
I was very embarrassed.
Why do you think that is? Yeah,
and I totally understand what this. I think it's a bit of a two-part thing. One side is obviously being the client, the receiving end. When we sort of reflect back to what recruitment was, old school times, as people call it. It was very much a lot of cold sales. You'd be in the office, the people on the receiving end would constantly get hammered on the phone, people trying to sell them something or similar. And then obviously on the flip side, being in those organizations, it was very cutthroat, quite, I don't want to use the term aggressive because obviously that's quite a triggering word, but it was quite a bolshy environment to be in as well. And so, I know people who, if they're in the wrong recruitment environment, they always say, recruitment's not for me, I want to try a different industry. And it's such a shame because actually I can see the potential of them being a really good recruiter, but it's the experiences that they have in one organization really sort of impacts what it is they want to do afterwards. But yeah, I think it very much goes back to the times when it was that classic cold calling all the time. Very long hours. Used to get into the office for 7:50. I think I used to start work at 7:40 when I first started. Wouldn't leave the office until well after 6, and obviously couldn't take a laptop home. So you obviously had to put the hours in. I think about like, how did I manage to survive during that time? Because I used to commute for an hour and a half both ways to get into the office. And so, yeah, and I think that's why recruitment gets the bad word that it does. Obviously now I'm a lot more, forthcoming with saying what it is I do because I'm so passionate about it. But yes, there's definitely the first few years where you go out somewhere, people are like, oh, what is it you do? You're like, it's what I do.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer.
Yeah. So it's not as bad as it sounds, I promise. Like, I'm not that kind of person.
Well, it's interesting because there is that reputation out there, and certainly there's some people, as in any job, some people are better than others, and depending on who you're dealing with, you might be left with different impressions. But I do think that, and I always thought to myself, there must be a better way to do things. And I know that ultimately you get paid by the people who are searching, by firms, and they are your clients. It's not the candidates, but it seemed to me when I spoke with you and obviously listened to Lucy as well, you're trying to do it a little bit differently. And I don't know, maybe from my perspective, it seems like you're trying to do it a bit more personal and a bit more with a care for the candidate rather than just, here's another role, here's another role, here's another role.
Yeah.
So why is that important to you?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I actually started off as a candidate myself. And that's how I sort of fell into recruitment because I used to do temporary work. And actually, the consultant who's represented me to the clients, she was brilliant. And so it was very interesting to then be on the other side. And actually, what I learned is the service that she provided to me is something that I wanted to give back to the people who I then represent. And ultimately, it's not in anyone's interest to put someone in an opportunity that they're not going to enjoy. It reflects badly. That person is not set up to succeed. And the ultimate thing is you always want that person to succeed in anything. So even if they're offered an opportunity and they don't decide to accept it, you've got to completely appreciate that. That's not something that's in your control, And so I think, the candidates, and I don't really like using the term candidates because it's almost like a product, but people aren't products. They're individuals. And so you're actually making those life-changing, I guess, you're supporting them in life-changing decisions. And I forget, there's actually one person who I've known for about 5 years, and she always says, she's like, Elspeth, I blame you for where I am now. Why do you say that? She said, you put me in this amazing company. I met my husband there. We relocated to this country. Now I've got a child. We're now moved somewhere else. And she said, if you hadn't placed me in my job, I never would have met my husband. I never would have had the opportunity to relocate. And so actually hearing really nice success stories like that really, I think, embeds with myself, how much I really want to sort of support people and sort of give back to them and almost have like a very small part in the amazing, life change that people have. And I've partnered with recruitment consultants and placing myself. And, if it wasn't for them for not introducing me to C&C Search, I wouldn't be where I am now. And actually, I've got to be so grateful.
I didn't know how the introduction happened with you and Lucy. Is that through recruitment consultants?
Yeah, and interesting. I actually knew Lucy from many, many years ago, but it hadn't really crossed my mind at all. I think there's always that nervousness to reach out to an ex-colleague of yours that you haven't spoken to for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And, I've got to reflect on that person that placed me because I'm so grateful for where I am now, but I never would have had that opportunity if it hadn't been for the recruiter who kindly put me forward and sort of put me back in touch with Lucy.
Yeah. And when you talked about career changes, that's obviously the topic of many of my conversations here with my guests. So what are your observations? What are your thoughts? I mean, you've been doing that for quite a while, speaking with people, mostly women, because of the nature of the industry that you focus on, who are looking to make not just changing jobs, but sometimes they are career transitions into a completely different industry. So I wonder if you have some of your own observations on what usually helps, what sometimes gets in the way, and how we could help anyone listening make that process easier.
I think, from my personal experience and actually a couple of my peers is don't be afraid. And actually it is okay to be afraid at the same time. So I think, predominantly speaking for females, we sort of don't like to put ourselves out there as much as others. And I think that comes with it, then comes the imposter syndrome. So you think, oh, what happens if I'm going to fail? It's way above me. I don't think I can do that. And so it's okay to actually be afraid, but don't be afraid to take those chances. And I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. And so definitely, believe in yourself, and those moments of self-doubts are completely natural. So let those self-doubts come in, but actually learn yourself how to overcome those self-doubts so you can learn from your experiences and then just keep developing yourself on a more personal basis in order to then become the best professional self in an environment. So I always say, be afraid, but also don't be afraid at the same time.
I like it. And there's probably people out there thinking, but what does she mean by that? But I do think it's exactly that. I think it is a combination of making room for the feelings that you have and not hiding away from them or denying them.
Yeah,
You're saying,
exactly.
But then at the same time, not letting that get in the way. It's a bit of obstacles in the way. You go around it, but you don't pretend that it's not there. And also you don't let that stop you on your trajectory, I suppose. I love using driving metaphors. I don't know why. I'm not even a driver myself.
I think especially, with the obstacle, learn about that obstacle. Why is that specific thing an obstacle to you? How can you overcome that obstacle? And it may be that you don't necessarily overcome that obstacle right at that moment in time, but actually learn about yourself in order, okay, well, how best am I going to approach this obstacle in order to go over it, or as you said, around it, rather than sort of trying to bash through it or sort of actually not getting to that stage at all. So I think there's a lot of self-reflection that comes with it, definitely. And actually for me, one of the biggest changes for me is, pre-pandemic times, I think naturally we were all in this rat race to a certain degree. Didn't actually take time to think about yourself. You just sort of went along with it. And so when the pandemic started, I actually had a bit of time to reflect, and reading wasn't ever really my thing at all. And I decided to read one book, and it's called The Subtle Art of Giving a F. And that actually changed my complete perspective of everything from then. It's amazing how one book can have such a big impact. And I learned from that book that you can't control everything. People make their own decisions. Things happen that are out of your control. A classic thing will be, you're stuck in a traffic jam. You can't control that you're in a traffic jam. So why are you getting worked up and annoyed the fact that you're in a traffic jam? Because what you're doing is that you're then endorsing yourself to then get more annoyed about other things that happen after that. So actually, it's okay to be stuck in that traffic jam. Why do you care? So that was, I guess, the pivotal moment for me, reading that book, that I thought, okay, actually, I need to sort of view things very differently to how I had done before.
Yeah, I think we often these days fall into the trap of thinking that we can control everything. And I think especially for us as working women, there's always a tendency because of all the different roles that you may have as a partner, as a mom, as a colleague, as a member, community neighbor, whatever it may be, to just try and organize everything. And part of that organization, I find, often pushes us towards a desire to control everything, so that every time when something doesn't go quite that way, we tend to blame ourselves probably much more than we should have.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think part of the challenge that many people have, not just women, is to have getting more into spiritual territory here. But regardless of whether you're religious or spiritual or not at all, I think believing that everything depends on you and you solely, I think it puts a lot of pressure on people.
Definitely. And I think especially in the art of social media that we see nowadays, there's the pressure to look a certain way, to eat a certain way, to dress a certain way. It's then that additional pressure that's then also put onto you as well from the likes of social media. And even if you don't have an Instagram or a Facebook or a TikTok, if you're professional, you're on LinkedIn, there's still those things on LinkedIn that you see nowadays, and the posts that are getting posted that were never posted before, or the stuff that you see in the news, that still has a massive impact, I think, specifically on females, on how they should be seen in a workplace.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've just started doing my own social media, as you know, for the podcast, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. But there's certainly days when I just want to shut it all down and not look at it for days. And it's just because I think there's always somebody sneaking in there with a message of, I'm going to show you how to make 1 million. I'm going to show you how to get 1,000 followers. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you that. And that message, I hate it because it makes you feel like you're not doing enough already. And maybe you want to get there, but it forces you to compare with someone who's, 20 years ahead of you or 15 or even, and it's almost daunting. And I've tried to stop voices like that. And I think that, you know what, I'm going to go at my own pace. And I just want people to stop trying to sell me that one solution that's going to get me from A to B. And I've noticed that you, as a firm, are quite active in social media as well. So I wonder how that relates to your business, because I find that many of the traditional businesses in the city are yet to embrace social media as a channel, for which actually they find that that's more just for fun rather than actually getting you any valuable business.
Of course. I think for us at C&C Search, we've talked about that partnership giving back to the community, and actually research has found if you can physically see someone on sort of the media platforms, then it's easier to connect with that person or that organization rather than just sort of seeing a picture on a website. And that's why we really utilize it, but also sort of tapping into different generations as well who don't use, the classic LinkedIn that we're sort of used to, or sort of know how to use a CV. I guess it makes us a little bit more personable, so people know who we are, and what they sort of can see on social media, rather than sort of, as I said, just a picture on a website where you don't actually feel that connection with someone.
Yes. Do you have any tips, I suppose, for anyone who's trying to use that either for business purposes or their personal one? And certainly for your clients, I know that you're there for your clients to find them good candidates, but have you ever had conversations with them about using social media as a way to actually attract talent?
I like the second part of that question about attracting talent, because I recently attended a course and they talked about how you should start using TikTok in order to attract talent to your organization, because that's where the majority of a certain generation are on, compared to sort of going onto the classic job boards. It's still a bit of an unknown territory for me from that side of sort of really utilizing TikTok, but sort of relating back to your first question, make it as authentic and relatable to you as a person. Don't put on a front. People will buy into you who you are. So make sure that you really bring that true self onto social media as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably true, not just about when you go out there on social media, but actually even when you're applying in the traditional way and just drafting your CV, preparing for an interview. And it does make me wonder if obviously over the years that you've worked in the industry, that you've noticed certain trends. I mean, you obviously mentioned the younger generation being much more reliant on communicating via social media. So much seems to have changed now, especially in the last few years after COVID.
Well, for us at C&C Search, not only do we do the search element, but we do lots of events specifically within that HR community that I predominantly focus on. We host roundtables, we host seminars for them. There are a lot of other agencies, don't offer that. And we're sort of aiming it at the more juniors in the business, so more of like the HR advisors, because there's a big gap in the market. It tends to be sort of their managers or managers who have the opportunity to go to networking events, but actually the HR advisors are always the ones that are overlooked, but yet they're the ones who are really keen to learn, want to build up that network, meet like-minded people. So we've developed an HR sort of roundtable series specifically for HR advisors. And then there's another part that we look at C&C Search is that training offering to our clients as well. So, Lucy and myself are big advocates for communication training, which interestingly, we hosted a webinar and we had something about 5,000 people sign up to this one webinar. And I think that was a massive shock to us, because for us, saw it as like a normal topic, but actually there must be a gap out there to have so many people sign up to this one webinar. So we actually now go into organizations and deliver training to clients around communication styles.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned communication training, because we've had a few people on the show talk about communication skills, and there are a few coaches out there, and it sounds like there's a lot of demand. And I do wonder if it's because we tend to hide so much behind screens and devices these days that we need training on how to communicate. It should be the most basic thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're constantly on our phones. I know we talk about social media, but on the likes of social media, constantly, on emails. When I first started out in recruitment, you were hardly ever on emails. You're always picking up the phone, calling everyone. Now, gosh, if I get a handful of calls a day, I'll be very lucky.
No one's going to answer.
I much prefer
exactly,
and people feel a lot more comfortable doing it over email than they do over the phone. So actually, what we're seeing a bit of disparity. It is definitely that communication piece and communicating is sort of understanding how you develop yourself and understanding what your needs are, and that effective communication piece in order to then verbalize that externally, whether it's that to your peers or to maybe someone that you're supporting, to HR, for example, and how effective it can be. And I mean, prime example, how many times have you gone into a meeting and you've built it up in your mind? So you've already built up this big story in your head before you've even actually stepped into that meeting room. So it's actually, okay, well, taking that away and going into the meeting room and just observing, not making any prejudgment, but literally just observing. And then going back and reflecting on that and reflect about your own emotions and how that meeting made you feel, to then effectively communicate what it is that you need after that meeting.
Yeah, and I think that applies with the same strength, not just to your work life, but actually to any situation in life. And I think you mentioned a few things there. You mentioned, first of all, accountability and responsibility, and being aware, listening, and then taking accountability for your own actions and reflecting, which, took me, I must admit, a long time to get there. Even if it's 2 minutes, it doesn't take very long. But just it's funny just how much reflecting can give you in terms of taste. But that's why I actually wanted to dial back and talk a little bit more about your own personal experience as well, because you are leading now practice at C&C Search, and that's a big responsibility, leading people. So wondering if you also had to make some changes to step into that role over the years.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely that, as I mentioned, imposter syndrome has crept through quite a few times during sort of over the years. And actually, when I reflect back, I was very young to step into sort of any sort of managerial role. At the age of 25, I had in my mind, right, that's it, I'm going to be a manager. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a manager. And that's sort of the term that was always used back then as well, not a leader, but very much a manager. So I think at 25 years old, I was already managing people, which is crazy when you look back at sort of how young. And the good thing that I've learned is look at people who you aspire at, also aspire to be. I've had some brilliant managers. And so what I've done is that, okay, what's worked well for me from those managers? That's what I'm really going to try and implement moving forward. And again, I've also had some awful managers. So again, why was that person not aligned to who I was? Was it something that didn't quite align for us? You've got to listen. That's the key thing. They say, 70% listen, 30% talk. So listening is really key. And that's something else that I've really learned is just don't talk, listen, really listen to what the other people need. And you have to adapt your leadership style.
I think that's also true, not just working with people, but generally, I think I often say the best salespeople are the ones who listen the most, not the ones who talk the most, contrary to what people might think. And we were talking about earlier how you did some workshops and you noticed the demand, you noticed what people were signing up for, and then you adjusted and adapted that way. And I always find that that's kind of what I like to say, the reverse of the very aggressive approach where you start with a product and you try and push it. It's more like listen to what people are trying to tell you that they need, and then offering something that offers value. And I think we often tend to miss that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's all about that active listening. So we can sit there and listen, but actually, are you really actively listening to what that person says? And then making sure that you relay back to what you understand that they've said, so you can get clarity whether you're both on the same line and sort of have that shared reality of what it is you're trying to achieve. But yeah, leadership is never easy. If there's someone out there that says leadership is easy, I would love to meet them, because I'd love to understand what it is that they do. People will always be people at the end of the day, and you can't control how they're feeling, what their emotions are or anything, but you can be there to support them as much as possible, and actually seeing that person grow and develop. I was speaking to two people in my team the other day, and they've both been with me for just over 3 years now, and it's just hearing and seeing how different they are from when they first joined in the 3 years. There's definitely an immense moment when you're feeling really proud to see how much they've developed as a person, and you're part of that journey as well with them. And yeah, I think you then have to reflect inwards to say, okay, this is the reason why I do leadership at the end of the day. It is difficult, but actually seeing how much that person has developed over a long time, or even just a short period of time, it can give you big satisfaction.
Yeah, and it sounds like you found your place, at least for now. But have you ever had any doubts in terms of thinking about switching, leaving, completely changing and overhauling? And that probably leads us a little bit into the mental health aspect as well. Because we all have good and bad days. And I know that especially you and Lucy are very good with setting boundaries and actually talking about that. vocally on social media, because so often we forget to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was getting closer to the age of 30, there was definitely a big self-doubt moment where I thought, oh my gosh, is recruitment for me? Is this all I ever wanted to do? I didn't think I wanted to do recruitment as a career. Huge doubts, I would say, a couple of years before I turned 30. And I spoke to someone who really she broke it down for me and was brilliant, sort of sharing ideas with her. And she said, okay, well, what parts do you like about recruitment? And for me, it was all about that partnership. I was like, I love building relationships with people, really understanding what their journey is. And I love building relationships with my clients. So we sort of, delved in a little bit deeper, and actually upon reflection, what it was maybe the firm wasn't right for me at that time. So I did actually enjoy recruitment, but it was the firm. And so hence, fast forward and moving on, I think it's natural to sort of go through, at least for me, I believe it's natural to go through periods of doubt, because actually you then sort of going back to that obstacle, it's almost an obstacle of doubt that you think, okay, what is it I'm going to do? What else is out there for me? But sort of overcoming that, you then become the best version of yourself after that period.
Yeah, and I often find that we do need that element of feeling uncomfortable, because that usually means you're growing. If you're very, very comfortable somewhere, I always have a warning. It might not last too long, because one day you're going to wake up and you're going to realize that actually something's not quite right. You can't be comfortable for too long. I think either you're not challenging yourself enough and you're not giving yourself best chance to succeed, or you might, and it's happened to me and it's happened to others, just wake up one day and realize that something's not actually working. And, it could be professional, it could be personal.
Yeah.
But I often find that myself, I had to go through a few more difficult weeks, I'd say, recently. And it made me think that, that is necessary, because it does really force you, a bit like in your example, to just evaluate things, break them down into small pieces and find out where the issue is, because it often might not be what you initially start with.
Yeah, definitely. I like how you use the term issue, because it's a word that I'm very much trying to move away from personally, because I think issue has this big cloud over it. So I always try and use the word challenge rather than issue, because you can overcome a challenge, but you can't necessarily overcome an issue. And so you sort of reframing it as a challenge, it gives it a little bit more perspective that you can overcome it.
Yeah, because it sets you nicely to think about, okay, this is something I probably have to work on, but it doesn't mean it's the end of everything. It's just another thing to get through. And I think that's very important out there. But how, so maybe in your practice, or even with the people that you work with as a leader, or maybe even with your clients, how do you make sure that looking after our mental health and well-being is actually prioritized? Because I know it's become very trendy, and all these companies are signing up people for apps and thinking that they're doing a lot for mental health. But it sounds to me like there's still a big piece missing.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I think there is still a humongous piece missing, specifically with the HR professionals within my network. They talk a lot about their own organizations, about what they're trying to do, maybe from a learning and development perspective for the organization, or sort of well-being for the organization, or looking at that employees, or sort of the retention rates. But actually, none of the conversations I have is looking at the HR function and their peers and themselves from that perspective. They all think about the organization, but never look at themselves as professionals. And I think there's a big gap. HR professionals definitely need to think for themselves from a learning and development perspective, from a well-being side. So it's actually really understanding what mental health means to yourself, but also to your direct peers, but also to the organization, and making sure that you also try and prioritize yourself. It's the classic saying, health is wealth. And if you're not healthy within yourself, how can you then be that best support person externally and perform to the best that you can for your sort of peers and for your organization? There's still sort of managers who are managers because they've been in an organization for X amount of years, but they don't necessarily have the leadership skills. And so if someone comes up and approaches them around sort of well-being, they may shy away because they just don't know how to approach a conversation like that. So I think it's going to be one of those things that's always constantly developing, adapting, and we're just going to keep learning from as well.
Yeah, indeed. But I wanted to ask you, and this is probably the question that I ask towards the end of the interview to every one of my guests, is where do you hope this journey would take you, and what is your ambition for for the business that you're building now, and more broadly for the industry, because I know you're very well plugged in and you do care about not just your own little piece of the market, but the industry as a whole.
Yeah. I think for me, it's very much that partnership piece. And that's a legacy that I want to hold as well, and impact I want to have, so that people reflect back and say, I really enjoyed that moment where I spent with C&C Search, or sort of with Elspeth, where she mentioned maybe a specific role, or I attended one of the webinars that she hosted and I took away this one thing. Or as I said, that person who I've known for many years, and she said how I placed her, and then she met her husband. For me, it's very much just having a very small part in a very large picture. And that's could be anything from learning something new to actually maybe even just changing their mindset about what a recruitment agency is. I actually spoke to someone the other day, and he said, gosh, he was like, I've always had this perception of what agencies are, and you've given me such a different perspective of it since speaking with you. And actually moving forward, I hope that that's the changes that I want to make to people, is just those little micro changes, and have a small part in a bigger picture, and really looking at that partnership piece and that community as well.
Yeah, and that almost sounds like there's an element of coaching into it. And I've always thought that that's what probably more businesses in your line of work should probably adopt, because it's probably soon it's going to be the one way to differentiate yourself from a robber. Because robbers could be sending you roles, but they're not going to give you any personal advice, are they? So, yes, I suppose that's some of the challenges. But I'm also wondering, because I know that you're always working on interesting things behind the scenes. Is there anything that we should look out for? You mentioned some of the series that you're doing now are free and available for everyone to join. But in case someone hasn't heard of them before, how can they get in touch or benefit from what you're offering?
Definitely LinkedIn is the best way. So please search for me at Elspeth Shaw on LinkedIn, or go onto our website, which is C&C Search. We have a secondary company called the C&C Academy, and that's our big learning platform. We've got a brilliant person called Anna who's been revamping the website, so it's literally just gone live as of yesterday. So please do have a look at that, in the C&C Academy, and please just reach out. Always here to support as much as possible.
Yeah, and I can honestly, after speaking with you and having met you before, tell that you do genuinely care about people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in that business, and you certainly wouldn't be successful in it. So really, thank you for that. I know how much you reflected on people coming back to you and say, oh, that really helped me. So I'm hoping that with this podcast, as when they listen to it, they're going to say, oh, I listened to Elspeth and she told me this and that stuff with me. So I'm sure we hit some of those moments. So thank you very much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Sound of Breaking Glass. I truly appreciate you being here with me. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss on any new episodes. They drop every 2 weeks. I'd also love for you to join me over on Instagram, on LinkedIn, where I share more behind the scenes moments, guest insights, and extra resources just for our amazing Breakers community. Let's keep the conversation going, and I can't wait to connect with you there. Until next time, take care and keep breaking through.